I'm Dr. Stan Ward, Claremont Lincoln University, and welcome to the Claremont Lincoln University Changemakers Facebook Live program. It's a new series we're starting where we have an opportunity to feature the work of our alum as changemakers. Today we have with us Cher Ofstedahl, and she is local here in Claremont, and so she's going to tell us about her work as a changemaker. So let's start with Cher. What do you want the world to know about you?
Gosh, well, that's a huge question.
Yeah, purposely.
First, thanks for having me here. I'm honored to be one of your first guests on the Changemaker series. What would I want the world to know about me? My first instinct is I don't want them to know anything about me because I'm internally a very shy person. Although I seem pretty outgoing on the outside, I still am very timid. But having just gone through the CLU change project for my capstone, I have discovered now more than ever before that if you want to change something in the world, you have to speak up. So I think I'd want the world to know that in addition to being a mother, a wife, and a good friend, I'm also an imperfect person in an imperfect world, striving to make improvements through change on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I'm just reflecting, I really like how you pointed out being a little shy, because I think sometimes we feel like in order to be a change maker in the world, we have to show up big and loud, and may not always be the case.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Because I'm here to try to do something different.
Yeah. So, of course, we had 7 questions that I came up with that we're going to walk through with our 30 minutes together. So the first of those is, what was the goal of your change project at CLU?
It's a hilarious first question to ask me because, as you know, you and I went back and forth on this because I thought far too big when I first began thinking about what kind of a project I'd like to tackle. I knew I really wanted to focus on gender inequity in the field of human social services because that's the field I work in. 84% of the direct care workforce is female, and they're perfect for it because they have wonderful characteristics natural to the gender, such as kindness and generosity and compassion and selflessness. But those are things that are not normally thought of as leadership characteristics. So only 14% of the top executive positions in the social and human services fields are female, even though 84% are female in the workforce. So I thought I wanted to tackle something that changed that inequity. That's a little tough to handle in 10 weeks, so I had to narrow the focus, and eventually my goal ended up being to come up with a tool that could be used in a mentoring program that would effectively match mentors and mentees using those common leadership characteristics, and yet which would give correspondence to those leaders that currently had strengths in certain areas and those mentees that had opportunities to improve in those areas, that they could be connected somehow, so that there would be a high likelihood of success in that partnership. So I came up with an assessment tool. That was my 10-week project.
Yeah, and one thing that was kind of cool there too, and I was just reflecting on our conversations, it felt like as we were working on the project too, there was this sense of saying, okay, we're not going to say there are masculine leadership qualities and feminine leadership qualities. We're going to say they're just good leadership qualities.
Right, there are, and because all of the characteristics that are thought of as feminine and all of the characteristics that are thought of as male, we all possess them. We may exhibit them in different ways and to different levels, but what we really wanted to do at the end of the day was come up with a way to support authentic leadership skills.
Yeah, and that was, it's interesting because question number 2 is this idea of what inspired your work. Of course, with our change model, we talk about the journey from the inside out, right? So starting with those core values and core commitments that can really drive us, and looking at where there's a gap between that and the world. So Continue to reflect on that a little bit. Tell us more about that internal journey.
Well, of course, I was greatly inspired by my own trajectory toward leadership over the 20 years that I've been involved in human social services field. But the actual project came about more from conversations that I've had with what I like to call my social services sisterhood. A group of women who are at various stages of their careers in the field, but they've all experienced some sort of gender bias or sexism as they've tried to strive for promotion within the field. And those conversations really helped me pinpoint where I wanted to go, because many women, as they try to become leaders in a traditionally male-dominated field, think that they have to adopt contrived characteristics. You know, they have to be more driven or ambitious or powerful or all of those things that do come across as being contrived. Hillary Clinton was a perfect example, and she was one that we talked about often, that as soon as she started running for office, she started wearing pantsuits and never wore a dress again. Margaret Thatcher in the 70s had a vocal coach come in and teach her how to lower her voice so she could sound more masculine. So it's just one of those things that, why can't we be authentic no matter who we are, whether we're male or female or anywhere in between these days? Just be authentically you and still find that way to lead.
Nice. And that leads us to thinking about some of the actions that you took. So tell us about, so you had this core sense of a need in the world, you wanted to address it, and then so what actions did you take in order to address that need?
Grandly enough, Claremont Lincoln University has set up this really lovely core model, which goes through 4 phases. So I began at the beginning with mindfulness. I really had to, in the process of narrowing the focus down to one project I could tackle in 10 weeks, had to become much more mindful. And that's the first phase. So in that mindfulness phase, I had to quiet all of that external stuff and really decide where I wanted to make change, how I could make change, and also in that phase, the research. What have people already done in the field? I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Where could I identify a gap where I thought I could slide something in that would fill a void and still make a difference? And so that was the first action that I took, was mindfully focusing on where to make a difference and doing the research. And then I gathered my posse, gathered my tribe around me.
Is that your sisterhood?
That's my sisterhood.
Yeah, okay.
And that's where we went through the second phase, which is dialogue. There was a lot of informal, unstructured conversation about what's going on and why is it that women aren't taking the lead in this field. And then, of course, the third phase is collaboration, and that's when we set about getting together face-to-face in much more structured meeting settings and going through the design process. What does this need to look like? How will it really affect that partnership between the mentor and the mentee? What do we need to put into it to make sure that there's success? So that collaborative phase was probably the most active phase. There were a lot of meetings, there were a lot of questionnaires going back and forth, a lot of surveys, a lot of reflection going on at that time. And then the fourth phase is change, and that's when we collectively piloted the assessment tool, came up with 6 great matches, and actually thought maybe this can work, maybe this can make a difference.
Yeah, that's great, because the next question is to ask about results. So tell us about some of the results you saw through this process.
Started the project with 22 stakeholder participants and ended the project with 20, which was great, because one of the results I wanted to personally track was, can I keep these people engaged through the 10 weeks? Because it's all volunteer time for them. They're really getting nothing out of it, so I need to be the thing they get out of it, the process. So that was one of the results. The result that we really strove for was to create the assessment tool, which we did that. We came up with a tangible product that could be replicated and taken forward. We also came up with, actually it was 3 tangible products, because we have one assessment tool for mentors, one assessment tool for mentees, and a kind of a matching guide so that we could match the 2 assessments together. So that resulted in 6 successful matches, 4 non-successful matches, and then we reflected on why the unsuccessful matches were unsuccessful, and we were able to then come up with some next steps to see how we can further refine the tool for next time we do it.
Yeah. And so I may go off script for a minute.
Sure.
Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I'm looking, we got some more time and just a few more questions here. As I hear you talking about successful matches and unsuccessful matches and making recommendations, so what were some of the things that you learned through that experience of experiencing both real success and, I don't want to use the word failure, but going, okay, this didn't work the way I thought it was going to work. What do you do with that?
Well, the first thing I wanted to do was make sure that the people who were not successfully matched understood that they were valued through the process, because that realization that not everyone is going to find a match when you have that limited a field of participants, that's just the way it's going to be realistically rolled out. So it was trying to find, okay, how can I still find something for them to do in the next step? So they became my advisory committee for the next step.
Yeah.
I think you have to turn those little failures into, you have to make lemonade out of those lemons. And so that's how you continue the process, because there are always going to be those lemons. What are you going to do with them?
Yeah. Yeah, and you've really got me reflecting again, because we talk a lot about, of course, collaboration and dialogue. And so here I'm hearing you describe a situation where, okay, you realize, so this collaborative group may not be a fit for this piece of the project, but oh look, there's this other role they can play. And so there's maybe some organizational learning that happens there. I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah, there definitely is, because you, when you start a project like this, you don't think about what happens if these 4 people don't successfully match up with anyone. That certainly never came into my mind until I was well into it and saw that they weren't going to successfully match. So yeah, there's a step that probably needs to be sussed out a little further when we're planning our projects, because there will always be those pieces that don't fit, but will still be very useful.
So you got me thinking. And I'm reflecting about, and I don't know if we talked about this in some of our work together or not, but you know, the heart of a story really are the obstacles and the challenges, right? So if there's no conflict, there's no story.
That's right.
And so I'm hearing, you know, these challenges and obstacles that you're experiencing, and I know just in my role working with all the capstone students here at CLU, every project has its challenges, its obstacles. So could you tell us a little more about what those obstacles were for you in the process of working through them?
The biggest obstacle is time. I think it will be for almost anyone. There aren't enough hours in the day to do all the things that you want to do. And when you're dealing with other human beings, trying to mesh schedules. Everyone's so busy these days, and the people that I needed to access to make this work were 4 different groups of people, and 2 of those groups were people who had already risen to the top in their fields. So they came from slightly different fields, but people who had already reached the pinnacle as executive leaders and CEOs, COOs. Those people have very difficult schedules to work around. So time was the biggest obstacle. Getting everyone together when we started the face-to-face meetings, making sure everyone had transportation and knew how to get there, and that we had food, and that we had beverages, and just all the logistics. But the great thing, the thing that was never a hurdle, was we were all there for the right purpose. And that's the piece that really made those 4 unmatched folks stick with the project because we were all kind of in it to win it. And even though they weren't successfully matched, they found the process no less satisfying, and they're still going to take pieces of the project back to their own organizations to implement those. So everybody ended up winning, even those that didn't match up in that assessment process.
Yeah, it's almost like there were secondary benefits and unintended benefits. We talk about unintended consequences. Here are unintended benefits, maybe.
So I think no matter what the hurdles are, because there will always be those challenges, if everyone's in it for the right reason, then you can find those secondary benefits. You can find the way around or over or through that hurdle and still come out on the other side, maybe not with the absolute intended or sought after solutions, but find some good solutions that you didn't think about.
And you got me reflecting on two things there. One is the power of that journey from the inside out, where you're having a real values-based project, because it sounds like you were able to tap that collaborative group into that, and so even when things didn't go the way you thought they were going to go, or, I mean, if I applied myself to this program and heard, sorry Stan, no match for you, like I could feel rejection, right? I can naturally fall into that space.
Absolutely.
But it sounds like because everyone had this core value that was motivating it, it helped folks kind of work through that.
It also helped that they helped design the project.
Oh, wow. Say more about that.
Yeah, so they knew going into it. I mean, every single one of those people who were part of the pilot assessment test had also helped design the questions, had also helped design the table of leadership characteristics. So they knew going into it what those matches would be based on. So I think that when they were not chosen as part of those successful matches, they were well aware of the reasons and could understand. I think if I came into a program and wasn't part of that, I would feel more of that rejection. But having lived it from the very beginning and had it, I mean, they all collaboratively helped me come up with it.
Yeah, I love it. They were co-designers with
Yes.
you. And I try to express that to our students a lot, this idea that, you know, you're not just showing up with a briefcase and a plan.
No.
That you're not having to carry the weight of this thing on your shoulders, because you have a collaboration group and they are co-designers with you of the project, and will even help you interpret the data.
Well, in fact, I think if you show up with a briefcase and a plan, you're defeating the whole purpose of the project, which is, you know, the core cycle, the stages of dialogue and collaboration that you need to make change. So if you show up and everything's already worked out, you're really just asking people to show up and admire your work.
Yeah, well, genius needs an audience. So,
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Hi, audience. And the other thing you got me thinking is about organizational rhythms, thinking about the timing for these CEOs and that kind of thing. It's almost every term I see at least one student comes up against just the hard realities of certain organizations move at a different pace. And you can either work with that flow or you can try to fight it. And if you fight it, it's hard.
Well, it is. I mean, the organization I work for is 50 years old. They've never had a female in a leadership position. In fact, until 15 years ago, they never had a leader who wasn't a priest. So wow. There's been a lot of change in the last 20 years of that 50 years, you know, of institutionalization. And you have to go with the flow. I mean, there are still members of the board who I love dearly who pat me on the head and say, "Hi, little girl." You know, it's hard to change some things. And you can fight them, or you can go along with the flow, and you can make change where it's subtle, and eventually it starts to snowball and become larger and take hold.
Yeah, I feel like maybe one of the themes of our conversation is authenticity, right? And so you can be an authentic change leader, and you don't have to change everything.
Right.
You can be true to those core values, but still respect the constraints, the limitations of just the physical setting you're in. And that's okay. You build with that.
You do. I think you have to come in with a certain amount of respect for what already exists, because that respect will help gain you allies, and you have to have allies if you're really going to effect change.
Yeah. Allies and advocates.
Absolutely.
Yep. So, well, this is a fun segue then to say, so what did you learn about change making?
I learned it's not for the weak of heart. It takes time. And at first I was very disheartened because I had such big, lofty ideas about the kind of change that I wanted to make and still want to make in the world. So that's where I had to learn to accept the fact that this change may be very small. We created a simple tool that can grow into a much larger piece of change. Still won't be the entire change, because in order to really create the kind of change that I'd like to see come out of this issue of gender inequity, you have to change individual minds on a global scale, and that will probably not happen in my lifetime, although I wish it would. But it's change happens one person at a time, one piece at a time, and you must be patient if you really want to make change.
Yeah, you've got me reflecting. Recently I've been doing a lot of personal just research and study on burnout and trying to understand how that works, because I find that the leaders that I want to help the most are those who are really serving others, strengthening leaders so they can strengthen others, and the folks who are going to be most susceptible to burnout are going to be those who are really committed to, it's not the slackers, it's the most engaged, right? And it's the people who are going to be the most committed to change. I bring all that up to say, so it's interesting, one of the characteristics of burnout is a sense that no matter what I do, I don't see any results. And so here I see you, or hear you saying, we can have a sense of accomplishment when we appreciate the limitations we're working with.
Absolutely. I will probably not see or have any great part in the eventual change that I would love to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
I can accept that because the small steps that I take toward that change, or the allies and advocates that I bring along to the party who then spread the word even further and take actions of their own, are still really positive and bring about this sense of hope.
And those are concrete realities.
They are. They're no less real than the ultimate change will be. They're just tiny pieces of it. I look at it sort of like a Seurat painting, where you can't see the entire dots of paint that he puts on the canvas. Each one of those dots is no less important because you require them to step back and look at the entire picture. So it's knowing that. I also think some of that is generational, because let's face it, a lot of the people who are coming into programs like this are a lot younger than I am. And there's something generational about that immediate gratification. I think it was Mark Zuckerberg who said billionaires can be made overnight now. Whereas Warren Buffett,
sure,
it takes a lifetime. So it's you're dealing with a lot of different pieces there.
Yeah, and so part of being a successful change maker is about your expectations, and about understanding the raw material you have to work with, and then setting appropriate expectations based on that.
And resetting them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you will have those challenges and you'll come across those hurdles throughout the process, and it's always being agile enough to not throw away the project because you come up against a roadblock.
Yeah, it's funny because in chapter 3 of the paper, it's what I plan to do. Chapter 4, what actually happened. And often there's a gap.
Absolutely. There was a huge gap in mine between what I wanted to have happen and what actually happened, and a lot of that was due to those logistical issues. But we kept dialoguing and kept collaborating, and I kept going back to mindfulness, so all of those pieces kept coming back into play in order to rethink and move and shift.
So we have just a couple minutes. What advice do you have for others who want to be change makers?
Really only commit to making change that you are truly passionate about. If you see an issue out there in the world that you think is a bandwagon issue, it's all I can think of to call it. It's very trendy and popular to jump on the bandwagon for certain issues. You have friends who are fighting for global warming, or you have friends who are fighting for gender inequity, or you have friends who are fighting for a certain thing. That's not enough. It's not enough to keep you going. And you will burn out, and you will not get the satisfaction out of it that you would get if it was something that you were passionately attached to. Your heart just won't be in it.
Yeah, you're reminding me when I think about this idea of core values. I'm convinced the way we know what our core values are is when we see what we make sacrifices for. Because if something has value, it means we're willing to pay a price for it.
Yeah, and just as in my project, we were striving to find authentic leadership. If you're not finding authentic passion, you won't make authentic change.
Yeah. So, with the time we have left, authentic passion, how do you get there?
I don't know how you get there. I couldn't tell you how I got there. My childhood experiences kind of led me to be effective where I'm at, but it was not my intention to work in human social services. I think the universe threw that in front of me because they had a plan that I wasn't aware of at the time, but my experiences in life made it the right fit. So it was something that I didn't know was authentically going to be mine until I got there. And then I owned it wholeheartedly and couldn't think of being anywhere else. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one.
It's all right. You shared a good story, though.
Yeah, well, I hope the
Perspective.
universe throws it in front of everyone.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled to have been here.
It really is a pleasure.
And I'm thrilled to be a graduate now of CLU.
Even better. That's right. You'll be
Even
graduating in just a few weeks. We'll
Yes,
be walking
I
in Sheldon
will.
Park.
Yay.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today. Again, Dr. Stan Ward here with CLU alum Cher Ofstedahl. And this is our new program, the CLU Changemakers. We hope to see you in our next Facebook Live event. Take care.